among that work that I do that Lindsay describes, one of the things that I've been working on and studying in the past few years has been the non-consensual AI deepfake ecosystem. And also I've done a lot of work on open weight and open source model safety. And I want to talk about this a bit today. Specifically, I want to look into this ecosystem. And I want to argue that things have not exactly gone well when it comes to AI deepfakes and their misuse for non-consensual content. And I want to argue that we should try to learn some lessons from the non-consensual AI deepfake failures of the past few years before it's too late. And unfortunately, I think that this is not going to be a very optimistic 15-minute presentation. But I want to start and jump in by talking about the plan. And it's a plan that most of you or all of you are probably pretty familiar with, especially if you kind of like run in the AI safety circle or do work in it, or have been for the past few years. And it's the plan for how we were going to make AI go well, right? For example, we can look back over a decade to Nick Bostrom's book on superintelligence in 2014, where he talks about how one of our goals should be to retard the development of dangerous and harmful technologies and accelerate the development of beneficial technologies, making AI safe by building the safe AI. The Concrete Problems in AI Safety paper, which came up a few years later, conflated AI safety with avoiding unintended and harmful behaviors that may emerge from poor design. The Human Compatible book a few years after that talked about how if we can create provably beneficial AI systems, we might be able to eliminate the risk that we might lose control. Paul Christiano has talked about this same plan, as has Google DeepMind, as has the Scalable Oversight research community, as has large parts of the model mechanistic interpretability community. So has Anthropic, so has OpenAI. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to shoot really many shots here. I know I'm taking quotes out of context, and I know I'm strawmanning just a little bit. And I'm also taking quotes from more than a decade ago in some cases, and sometimes people change their mind. I myself endorsed and wrote a version of this plan in a paper that I wrote in 2020. My point instead is to talk a bit about some of our struggles with trying to make this plan materialize. And we've been really endorsing this and working a lot on this in the AI risk management community. And it's kind of woven into our fabric, and it's been part of what we've been doing for over a decade now. So we should take some inventory on how things might be going. And I want to start, maybe just rewind a little bit to one particular slide. Notice the OpenAI article, Our Approach to AI Safety one. And I personally think that this had a very interesting choice of a cover photo for an article. But if you look at the bottom of that cover photo, if we enhance the text there, it says it's illustrated by an artist using DALL-E, which is interesting. This was an image created by DALL-E. And let's go back to April 2022. So this was before the chatbot dynasty, kind of. So April 2022 was back when GPT-3 was the most advanced AI system in the world. And for cultural setting, it was also when Chris Rock was slapped by Will Smith at the Academy Awards. If this helps, you place this moment in history. But April 2022 was also a really pivotal period in time for AI risk management because it was corresponding to the release of DALL-E 2, which was at the time was the most advanced system in the world by far for text-to-image generation. No prior system could remotely hold a candle to what DALL-E could do reliably in terms of photorealistic and dynamic image generation. And in developing and prior to releasing DALL-E 2, OpenAI really wanted to make sure that this was a safe system. And they kind of nailed it. They kind of threw the kitchen sink at things. About every stage in the development and release process, they inserted safeguards. They tried to make them as redundant as possible. And they wrote a long technical report. And I gave a quick summary of the 9 main things that they did. But in summary, this worked pretty well. And no real communities ever emerged around systemic misuse of DALL-E 2 for nefarious things like non-consensual deepfake porn or anything like that. And that was great. That was fantastic. I don't often say that OpenAI did an awesome job at something, but they did here. And that was very, very nice, at least until it wasn't, or until it didn't matter very more. Because in August of 2022, just a few months after DALL-E 2's release, we got a new peer to DALL-E 2. This was the Stable Diffusion 1.0 model, which was very comparable to DALL-E 2 in most ways, but differed in a few interesting ways. One is that it was trained relatively indiscriminately on internet data, including a lot of porn, so it knew how to create NSFW content. And it was also released openly. Meaning that anyone could use it and download it and modify it for whatever purpose, nefarious or not nefarious, as they wished. So Stable Diffusion was publicly released on August 22nd, 2022. And it didn't take very long, in fact, 2 days, for us to start to see a new type of headline for a new type of generation of open weight model, like this one from August 24th of 2022, saying that this AI tool is being used to make freaky machine-generated porn. And Stable Diffusion models, as open, very dynamic, very capable models, quickly became kind of the tool of choice for lots of image generation tasks, including non-consensual ones. And the rest is sort of history. We got more models, better models, more capabilities, more infrastructure, more communities, etc. And at this point in time, like AI non-consensual porn is probably a worse problem than most of us might think. It's really, this stuff is really accessible and it's really effective. If you wanted to, you could probably take a photo of me and nudify me by the end of this talk on your phone if you knew the right websites to search up. And just please don't do that though. Um, Recently in 2025, we started to see like a new type of headline like this one. 1 in 8 teens know someone targeted by deepfake nudes, new survey refines. And one way of illustrating kind of how things are reaching new heights almost constantly is from some research done by the Internet Watch Foundation, who monitors this space, who found between 2024 and 2025 a 26,000% empirical rise in the amount of photorealistic AI videos appearing to depict child sexual abuse that they monitored on the internet. And I really think that like non-consensual AI deepfake porn is becoming the first real domain in which we're starting to see AI harms that are truly widespread and truly devastating to the people that they affect. And as a result, the risk management frameworks and the case law that we establish around this area is probably going to set the stage for future challenges to come. So we have to ask, what has enabled this harm? And the short answer in large part is the open weight, open source model ecosystem. For example, the Internet Watch Foundation puts this pretty well. Perpetrators continue to use open source models as the tool of choice to generate CSAM images because access is offline on device, and there are few, if any, opportunities for criminal content detection and moderation. And as a result of this, we started to see a lot of open models kind of like surge onto the stage and become particularly popular. And it's not all openly available image and video generation models. It's actually a relatively small number that are the most popular for this type of content. Some of the sort of most popular models for this kind of stuff in this space are Stable Diffusion models, Black Forest Labs Flux models, Alibaba's WAN 2.x models, and then wait, hold on, Grok. Now, as of January, we have a whole new case study too in how not just open models are used for this kind of content at scale, but also closed models. But I should say that when it comes to the volume and severity of content, it still is the open model community along whose back that most of this content and the development of it is built upon. Now, I need to say something and be clear about one thing. And it's very important, but I'm only going to say it once. And that is that this is not an anti-open model or open source or open weight talk. I'm not an anti-open model source or weight person. We need to recognize that there's a lot of good and bad here, but most importantly, everything's inevitable. I often say that open models are wonderful, terrible, and inevitable all at the same time. And there's just a bunch of really nice stuff and a bunch of really bad stuff. They diffuse power and influence, and they enable safety research, for example. And I think it's hard to understate how positive these things are. And I personally find it hard to imagine a very good future for AI that doesn't involve these factors at play. But there are also just some of these troublesome things in red, especially the easiness with which open weight model safeguards can be undone. And as a result, we're starting to see like more and more severe harms from the open weight model ecosystem that were enabled or had their supply chain consist of what's going on in the open model space. So let's not end the timeout, time back in. And next thing that's, I think, pretty important to understand about this space is that mitigations really matter. And we are in an ecosystem where, for better or for worse, like access and ease of use and people just kind of knowing where to go and having stuff that is like good for them and they don't have to spend a bunch of trouble on using to create content, this is actually just the main bottleneck, as opposed to like technical challenges or something like that. And it's maybe not ideal to be in this kind of regime, but it's where we are at. This is the bottleneck. And as a result, like mitigations that try to increase friction or reduce access to certain types of harmful capabilities, this stuff does matter, and especially in a space where so many of the perpetrators are literally just teenagers. And as empirical evidence as to how and why mitigations can matter, we can look at what sometimes model developers do. For example, if we take models that are very comparable, except some of them have been trained with versus without porn in the training data set, we find very, very empirically different rates of usage for creating this type of content. Rates of usage between Stable Diffusion 1.0 and 2.0, for example, that are on order of 1,000. Meanwhile, there's also a lot of that model distribution platforms like Hugging Face and CivitAI can do to try to reduce access, but aren't necessarily doing very well. For example, if you go to CivitAI and you search up keywords that are dog whistles for CSAM, like teen, young, girl, or petite, or dog whistles for a notification like nudify or undress, you'll find well over 20,000 models that have some pretty concerning names, which probably should be moderated, but for some reason are just out there easy to access on the internet. So we're in a space where we can't put the cat all the way back in the bag, but there's a lot that can be done that isn't necessarily being done. And in light of this, I've come to really understand AI deepfake porn as being a case study in how to fail at building a healthy AI ecosystem. So it's a space in which we have some large-scale, foreseeable, and mitigatable harms. Those harms are often facilitated by a relatively small number of developers and distribution platforms who tend to exercise relatively little care and relatively little action. This is not a space where there's established standards, either endogenous or from governments down. It's a space with little accountability, although maybe some lawsuits in the future might change that a little bit. It's a space with low transparency. My co-author Max and I spent some time looking at what certain open model developers did to even mention risks, let alone like their efforts to mitigate them. And by default, what we found far more commonly than everything else combined is just no mention of risks or risk mitigations. And it's also a space that is relatively ineffectively governed. And I want to be kind of clear about what I mean here, because so many governments across the world have worked to regulate this space by criminalizing the non-consensual production or distribution of personalized AI porn content. And that is great. And I'm glad that this is a thing. But it's also notable that this is kind of the least effective way possible of regulating the supply chain here. And it's good that we're doing this. But it's really notable that the go-to approach for governments here has been to regulate the supply chain when it is millions of users wide, rather than trying to regulate the supply chain when it is like single digits or tens of model developers or model distribution platforms wide. So we have to ask ourselves a serious question in light of, I think, some of these difficulties, and that is, how well is the plan going? How much does it really matter that systems like DALL-E, Sora, Veo, etc. are safe? And it's not zero. Right? Like, I'm very glad to live in a world in which these systems are not just nudifying people all over the place. We saw how bad things can be with like Grok making this kind of stuff mainstream and accessible and right out in the open. And that's pretty bad. But what has definitely not happened by these success stories is making the ecosystem safer. And I think we need to learn a big lesson from this, that harms tend to get out. Capabilities tend to proliferate. Open models tend to follow very closely, just a few months behind closed models. And whether it's by the open model ecosystem or by the relatively irresponsible choices of certain closed model developers, things tend to get out. And the safety of the ecosystem is much more set by the worst systems inside of it, as opposed to the best systems inside of it. And maybe this is just what AI safety really is in the real world, in practice. Maybe this is just how things happen. Even if things at the frontier are safe, the things that follow the frontier are much less likely to be safe and much more diffuse as well. So the question we have to ask is, like, maybe how can we fail less, or how can we try to make the ecosystem here healthier? And I recently finished a book that I'd recommend anyone checking out if you're interested. It's called Technopoly by Neil Postman, and it was written in 1992, and it has a really nice quote that I think is pretty useful. The technological change is neither additive nor subtractive. It is ecological. One significant change generates total change, and you have reconstituted the conditions for survival. So in other words, if you're like a model developer or if you're an AI safety researcher and you try to improve AI safety by building a safe system, you have not merely added a safe system to the world, you have also changed what the ecosystem is like. And the consequences of that are going to be far-reaching and wide. And in the case of like non-consensual AI deepfakes, some of them have been very dire. So this is not to say that AI safety does not have an important technical component. I still am a technical researcher, and I'm personally very excited about technical tools and improving that toolbox for open weight model risk management. But I think it's really important to understand what ways of approaching this work are like an order of magnitude more impactful than other ways when it comes to making the ecosystem healthier. Because technical safeguards only matter if they're used consistently. So therefore, the best reason to work on technical safeguards is if and when they are a prerequisite towards standards and accountability in the ecosystem, not merely to help any particular company make their particular system safe. Because that stuff is good, but empirically repudiated as a way of trying to make the overall AI ecosystem better. So I think the conclusion here that I've reached in my study of this and other projects of mine in the past few years is the systemic problems, which I'm going to argue are most of our problems in this case, are ones that require systemic solutions. And instead of trying to like make safe superintelligence or something like this, it would be much more prudent for us to think about the goals of AI safety as working toward good standards in the ecosystem, improving accountability infrastructure, improving transparency in the companies and awareness of the domain, instituting checks and balances on power, and trying to make society more resilient to incidents that are basically inevitably going to pop up. So in conclusion, I want to leave you all with a few thoughts that I hope I can get bouncing around your mind as you think about some of these dilemmas alongside me. And that is that we probably almost certainly won't make AI safe overall just by making safe AI systems. That AI safety is not a model property, it's an ecosystem property. That harmful AI capabilities proliferate reliably, sometimes via open models, and sometimes via companies that don't care about risks very much. But all of the precedent of the past few years tells us that they will proliferate. That any agenda for AI safety that does not account for proliferation in open models should be considered unserious. And that's kind of the main and biggest idea behind what I'm trying to say, that open models and proliferation via irresponsible developers are a very big gaping hole in the plan. And then finally, that instead of hoping for safety guarantees, we should try to instead adopt a harm mitigation paradigm. And maybe the best thing that we can do with long-haul AI safety is to try to build institutions that are good at incentivizing the right things and disincentivizing the wrong things and playing the game of whack-a-mole forever. And maybe if that's the best thing we can do, that might just be okay. Thanks.